Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are at the start of spring training for the 2032 season. A couple of weeks have gone by since we finished up our last episode. Really, nothing at all substantive has happened. We tried to make offers to a few cheaper international amateur free agents, and with only $230,000 left, we did not have enough money to sign either of them. And we subsequently have signed a few players to minor league contracts to bolster our farm system as we start preparing for the minor league seasons of 2032 as well. But really, nothing material has happened since then. But as we get ready for this 2032 season, I do have one significant change to our settings that I want to talk about. And if you've been looking closely at what our proposed team roster is for the spring training here, you probably have figured out what that setting change is. But I am going to allow two-way players in the sim from this point going forward. There's been maybe a little bit of confusion about my views on two-way players. I have no issues, concerns, reasons not to enjoy watching two-way players in real-life baseball like Shohei Ohtani. But the only time I have ever had an OOTP game that crashed on me was one of the few times that I have used two-way players in the past. So I just felt like it was a part of the game that was potentially a little bit buggy. So generally I don't play with it because really there's only one guy that it's relevant for at this point. So I had it turned off at the start of this sim, and then after the Buffalo Wings had been in the majors for 1 year in 2026, we signed Ohtani. But I felt like it would be disingenuous to turn on two-way players simply because we signed Ohtani. So that's why I've had it off for the last 5 years. But now we're heading into our final year with Ohtani, likely our final year with him on the team. And we've also made a trade for another potential two-way player in the young pitcher Juan Estrada this offseason. And many of you in the comments, not just in recent episodes, but in some cases over the past several seasons, have been telling me that it's just kind of silly and I should turn two-way players on. So given that we're in such a unique situation here where we potentially could have two-way players on a team, I think that's just too enticing as far as what is going to happen this season, what those players are going to look like, to not reactivate two-way players. And I'll keep it on for the remainder of this playthrough, however many seasons or decades I end up simming through with the Buffalo Wings. I did back up this entire game out of fear that it was going to somehow crash because I have two-way players turned on. Hopefully having them turned on, it won't crash, and it will get me over my perhaps irrational fear to using them in the game. But as free agency is ready to begin, we have 51 players in camp, so a few more than normal. And as I mentioned, we are going to try to see what Juan Estrada can do in left field, see what Ohtani can do in right field. He still has ratings for being an outfielder. His range is certainly not great. He could end up as our DH, but we've got a lot of guys who should end up as our DH, quite honestly, defensively. But he doesn't actually have any position ratings for right field at this point, and Estrada doesn't have any position ratings anywhere except pitcher at this point. So we're going to be focusing on getting them both as much playing time as possible over the next month or so. We're also going to be trying to get Willy Adames trained up at third base. He's going to be our utility infielder this year. He's proficient at second and short. I want to give him some time at third base even though Cam Collier will ultimately be our third baseman when the season gets underway. So it's going to be real interesting. We do at this point have a little bit of money potentially available. There are still a few interesting-ish players available on the free agent market. Prices haven't come down to the level that interests us yet, but if another few weeks go by and some of those players get more reasonable, there's a chance that we may try to add an interesting player for the back end of our roster over the next month before the season starts. And right now, with the number of guys we've got in camp, Rule 5 picks, guys who aren't going to be on the team, our total money available is really going to be better than this when we head into the regular season. So I'm going to be really excited to see what a team with two-way players looks like. I think it does obviously make it easier for us to potentially win. But given that we are 6 years into this playthrough, and despite 4 playoff appearances, we are 0 for 6 in actually winning it all. If it makes us a little easier for us to win this year, great. And then obviously going forward, everyone in the league is going to be on the same playing field as us as far as being able to potentially develop and acquire and play and benefit from two-way players. So we will see how spring training goes. I mentioned want to get some guys trained up at different positions and want to remain healthy. And then with Ohtani potentially back in the mix for the rotation, we've really got 7 or 8 guys technically competing for 5 spots in the starting rotation. So going to be interesting to see how all of that shakes out also when we make some difficult roster decisions to pare down from the 51 players that we have in camp to the 26 who will be heading north to Buffalo with us in about a month. And we've made it to the end of spring training. The team is broadly healthy. Obviously, we've got a ton of work to do offline to get our farm system teams straightened out. We've signed a bunch of minor league free agents, so we've got 64 guys in our rookie league team, but obviously a lot of them at this point are veterans who just ended up there by default, who will be potentially even as high as AAA with us, but certainly giving us a little depth and experience and, in many cases, good personalities in some of the other teams in our system. But the first project for me is going to be getting 51 down to 26, and once I've done that, I'll worry about figuring out what our minor league rosters are going to look like this year. You can see most notably Corey Seager, we signed as a minor league free agent a few weeks ago. Probably will put him in AAA. We didn't even bother bringing him into camp. He's not realistically going to make our team, but certainly a nice depth guy to have around. And Chris Bassett, we're going to keep him in the minors. We had to give him a contract that would become a major league contract if we put him on the team. Certainly have no intention of doing that, but if he can help us win some games in AA or AAA and serve as organizational depth if we do get buried with a rash of injuries, I'm happy to have him in the organization for things like that, even at the age of 43. And we have made the cuts to get down to our 13 men who will be on our pitching staff as we head north to Buffalo. I do have a couple guys banged up, unfortunately. Chris Sabatka, who we picked up in that big trade with the Dodgers, could be one of our top starters. Going to miss the first game or two of the season with back tightness. And same with Bryce Miller, our potential closer, who has a tender shoulder, so he's going to be out for the first couple days of the season. But we have a few days, 3 days until the season starts, so it doesn't start till the 4th. So will not be the end of the world to have those guys a little bit banged up. One thing I don't like seeing is that Ohtani's movement has dipped to a 40, which is the worst of any pitcher on our team. So he is a guy who is in the last year of his contract, as we've talked about. 6 years, 195 million, but we did structure it so it was a bit front loaded, and this team option could potentially be attractive to us. You can see he's gotten trained a little bit in right field over the course of spring training. Certainly out of respect for the pitcher who has been our ace all 5 seasons since he joined us. He's going to get a obvious shot in the rotation, but with that 40 movement, if he starts giving up a ton of dingers, it's not inconceivable that we would consider moving him to out of the rotation and maybe use him once in a while as a reliever and use him primarily as an offensive player for us. But as the season begins, Sabatka, Otani, Susana, the youngster Carrillo, and the youngster Juan Estrada, who we tried using as a reliever in spring training, and you can see he just didn't get a lot of action as a two-way reliever. So we're going to see what it looks like with two-way guys in our starting rotation. What that means is 3 guys who were starters for us last year, Andrew Painter, Hayden Yinger, and Sean Sullivan, end up in the bullpen with all of the starting pitchers that we have. Miller, as we talked about, going to be our closer. Caleb Ferguson and Franklin Heel back as relievers, along with the lefties Zane Adams and Kyle Backus. I will be kind of reorganizing some of these roles. This is just initially what our bench coach wanted to do with those players. But it's going to be interesting. We'll see how these guys do with Painter, Yinger, and Sullivan. As I mentioned, we've got 3 guys. You can see Sullivan started 28, 31, and 31 games for us the last 3 years. Yinger 14, 32, and 32, and Painter 29, 33, and 32 starts. So we've got a lot of experience in the bullpen. A lot of guys who probably aren't really happy being there. But at this point, Sabatka and Otani need to be in the rotation, and then Harleen Susana at 28, Jorge Carrillo at 26, and Juan Estrada at 24, trying to give some of the younger guys a shot in the rotation coming out of spring training. And if they don't work, we've got plenty of experience in depth in the bullpen that can probably transfer over to the starting rotation pretty easily. Oh, and as one final note, the last cut was Ronnie Henriquez, the reliever that we picked up in the Rule 5 draft. He was making a couple $1 million a year, and he wasn't really any better than the guys that we have on our team. So getting rid of him and some other guys as we've been paring down the roster does leave us in a situation where, since we are focused on trying to win it this year, we can definitely take on some salary as we get closer to the trade deadline this year. And it also gives us the opportunity, if we want to perhaps go after a higher priced player who happens to be falling in the draft, we should have some flexibility to do that as well. And the final cut for our roster is going to be probably a bit of a surprising one, but we're going to send Vaughn Necker down to the minors. He has nothing more to prove at Albany. He hit .364 in 129 at-bats for us last year. But he's going to be very hard-pressed to get any playing time, especially with Estrada and Otani in the mix to be outfielders now. And if we send Necker down for the year, or at least some period of time, it lets us keep both Henry Allen and Steve Frazier, who we picked up in the Rule 5 draft, and we like the looks of both of those guys. Given the likelihood that Otani is going to be gone after this season, it's very possible Basallo is going to be gone after this season. There definitely is potential playing time to open up for Necker, but he's just going to be sitting on the bench at the major league level. Not that he's got really any significant development that he needs to have happen at this point, but would rather have him play and don't view him as being materially better than Allen or Frazier. So because those guys are Rule 5 picks, we're going to keep them on the team for the time being. And if you're wondering why Willie Adames is going to make the team, even though his skills are deteriorating, he is our only captain at this point. And as I mentioned, we view him as our utility infielder. He's not going to be in any regular playing time. Basically, just when guys need a rest, that's an opportunity for Adames to potentially play a couple times a week. And as we're trying to actually build our starting lineups out of the potential roster, we are going to change one thing. Von Necker is back on the major league team, and we are going to move on from the young outfielder, the 23-year-old Steve Frazier, who I did like, but Frazier is a left-handed hitter, and we've got tons of them, particularly with both Ohtani and Estrada available as an outfielder, whereas Necker is a right-handed hitter, and when we're trying to build a lineup for against left-handed pitching, just made more sense to have Necker around. And as I mentioned, at his age, where he is in development, playing every day probably isn't critical, but we are also a win-now team, and when I was building out our roster versus left-handed pitchers, having Necker around as a right-handed bat just made more sense to me than Frazier, who was going to be hard-pressed, I think, to get into triple-digit at-bats, even if he was healthy all year. And with that final move for Necker to end up making the 26-man roster, we have our team set, and we have our potential lineup set. Against right-handed pitching, Seifu at second, Cam Collier at third, Ohtani will be our DH, Samuel Basallo at first base, Rutch at catcher, newcomer Austin Wells in right, Vance Honeycutt drops all the way down to seventh in left field. We've got so many good left-handed batters now. John Featherston, the center fielder, bats eighth, and the young shortstop Tim Hull will be batting ninth. Going against left-handed pitching, start off the same with Seifu and Collier, 1-2. Honeycutt moves up to the 3-hole. Rutschman moves up to cleanup. Rule 5 acquisition, Henry Allen at DH. Von Necker at first. New addition, returning to our team, Miguel Blaise in right. And then Featherston and Hull, again, are our 8 and 9 hitters for our very good defensive center fielder and are hopefully even improving young defensive shortstop. So what that means is that Adames is in the utility role we envisioned for him. Josh Springer is our backup catcher, and one other guy isn't in the starting lineup, and that's the two-way Juan Estrada. He's just caught in a numbers game right now. Love his potential bat against right-handed pitching in terms of his contact and his ability to get on base. But given his limitations and what positions he can play, it was going to be taking out Ohtani or a Basallo or a Wells or a Honeycutt to give him playing time. So we are going to try to rotate him in from time to time in left field, and clearly, although he does not have a ton of power, he is going to be a potentially very interesting pinch hitter off the bench for us. And we'll see how he does as a member of the starting rotation as well. Definitely going to be a challenge for him. He's only started 7 games of the 58 that he pitched in Pittsburgh last year. You can see as a starter, his stuff is not quite as electric as it looked as a reliever, but we still think he can improve his stuff a bit by improving his change and his sinker. So still think he could be a pretty interesting pitcher for us for years to come. And as I mentioned, although he may not be getting tons of playing time this year, at least as a starter, there is potential for the likes of Ohtani, Basallo, and even Wells, who's on a 3-year contract, but team options for the 2nd and 3rd years to all be moving on next year. So the turning on of the two-way players and the late addition of Juan Estrada when we made that big trade, trading away the number 1 prospect in our organization, Humberto Duque to pick up Estrada. Left us with an embarrassment of riches potentially on the offensive side. So I think we're going to have a really good bench. And as I mentioned, we've got a ton of depth for our starting rotation also. Don't know how this team is actually going to do on the field, but given that at this point we are down to a 26-man roster and we've got about $8.5 million to hopefully continue making this team better over the course of the season, I'm really looking forward to getting the season started and figuring out exactly what we have or don't have with these Buffalo Wings. And depending on how the season goes, there's also certainly opportunity for us to trade some guys away. Painter, we liked his contract when he was a starter for us. Right now in the pen, $13 million is certainly very expensive. The third highest number on the team this year at $14 million, and anticipated to be the third highest number on the team next year at $13 million. Not sure what type of trade market there will be for him, but certainly is a reliever who is not at the time being our closer. Could be an opportunity for us to clear up some money off of the books next year and give us even more flexibility. But obviously that's dependent on Sabatka, Susana, Carrillo, and Estrada doing the job. But we also do have Yinger signed for next year. Sean Sullivan finally going to be a free agent. He is the final original Buffalo Wing that we have. He's a guy that we picked in the second round of the 2024 draft. He ended up making the team out of spring training in 2026, and he is the only player that 6 years into the history of the Buffalo Wings has been with us since opening day of the 2026 season. And honestly, in 2028, he did spend some time in the minor leagues, but the only guy left who was with us on opening day of 2026. Ohtani, as we talked about, joined us as a free agent in 2027. Bryce Miller was a guy that we brought in 2026, in 2027, and 2028. So he was an original guy, but he went away for that 2029 season. So he has not been here continuously. And then among the everyday players, Seifu, we drafted him number 1 overall in 2026, and he did actually make his major league debut at the end of that year before beginning the 2027 season, spending half the year in the minors before he made his major league debut, and has obviously been with us forever since. So Seifu actually has played with us at the major league level every year that we've been here, but unlike Sullivan, he has not been on the roster since opening day of that first season for the Buffalo Wings in 2026. So a little bit of history of the team there. And with that, we are going to call it an episode. Really looking forward to seeing what these Buffalo Wings look like on the field this season. Very interested in seeing what a team with two-way players ends up looking like. Also really interested in seeing how some of the free agent additions look. The trade acquisitions of Sabatka and Estrada to hopefully bolster our rotation for many years to come. Interested in seeing how those guys do. So hope springs eternal for the Buffalo Wings. Have a lot of optimism for the upcoming season, and we'll find out what the media and the predictors think the Buffalo Wings are going to do this season at the top of our next episode, when we will play ball on the 2032 season. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.